Hi, my name's Matt Widgery from FramedPlanet.com. Today we're going to be having a look at the 10 reasons why you should be shooting in RAW and not JPEG. Okay, there's probably more than 10 reasons, but it fits into a nice little thing that I can fit on my hands, so 10 it is. So let's get cracking. Number 1, highest image quality. So yeah, basically what's happening is that a RAW file is an uncompressed and lossless file. A JPEG strips out a lot of information to make the file smaller, and that has an impact on the amount of quality that you get in the image because it's physically got less data in there. It's basically been filtered out, and so all you're left with is a sort of photocopy of a photocopy of a photocopy of the stuff that was actually seen by your sensor. Number 2, dynamic range. So basically with a JPEG file, you have got 256 sort of shades of any particular colour between fully black and fully white. So for any given shade of yellow or red or green or magenta or purple, you get basically 256 bits of it between the brightest and the darkest, right? It's not too bad, but if you look at a 12-bit RAW file, then you are getting 4,000-ish, and if you're looking at a 14-bit RAW file, you get 16,000. Variance between the white is white and the black is black, which is great for all sorts of things, especially if you're doing like a black and white image, for example. Then you get all these lovely shades in there that make the picture come to life, and it's much, much nicer to look at. Number 3, the settings are not baked in. This is super important. Your camera is actually making a decision for you when you press the button, leave it in JPEG and let that spit a JPEG out to the card. What you're basically saying to it is that I'm going to let you make the decision about how much contrast, how much saturation and how much sharpness is applied to that image. And it's very hard then to get rid of it again afterwards because, as we've already discussed, the JPEG is throwing away most of that information in the file. So if you look at your picture and it comes back and it's too contrasty or it's oversaturated, there's really not a lot you can do without introducing artifacts into the picture, because at the point where it can't make that decision anymore because it's lost the original information, the computer will just make it up, and that's where you get these weird little pixely bits and banding and all this other horrible junk that you get with a JPEG file when you try and push it or pull it too far. Number 4, memory is cheap now, and that's basically the whole point of it. When RAW files and JPEGs, when it was first a thing, when digital cameras first came out, the problem was that memory was expensive. I remember the first digital camera I got, which had a 16 megabyte card. And it would fit, I don't know, probably 100 JPEGs on it, something like that. But it would only fit 16 RAW files. And so that was actually less than you'd get in the film days when you'd get a 24 exposure film or a 36 exposure film. You're getting basically less than that on your digital camera, which is crazy when we think about it nowadays and we think about being able to fit thousands and thousands of pictures onto a memory card. And that's the point, you can fit thousands of pictures onto a memory card. Even if you've only got like an 8 gig one or a 16 gig one. You know, these days they come in 64, 128 gig, there's even half terabyte, 512 gigabyte SD cards out there. So you can fit more pictures on these things than most people are ever going to take on a single day. And if you are filling up a 512 gigabyte card on one shoot, you should probably question how much you're pressing that motor drive button. And it's the same thing when you get back to your computer as well. Okay, you might have a really old computer that doesn't have a terabyte or more of memory built into it, but you can go and buy a terabyte hard drive for 50 quid and plug that in. You can get a free terabyte of pictures just by signing up and getting a Flickr account. So there is no excuse anymore for saying that there isn't enough memory space to have your RAW files. Just shoot in RAW because memory is cheap. Number 6, non-destructive editing. When you use RAW files, you're normally going to be using something like Adobe Lightroom, for example, although other things are available, but give you an example, Adobe Lightroom, when you're loading your RAW files in there, what it will do, rather than actually make the changes to the file itself and save that as any kind of a JPEG, what it will do is it will keep the file, and then with, like, as it came out of the camera, like with all the original raw data off that sensor, it'll keep it all perfectly pristine and intact, and then it will apply a sidecar file which then loads up at the same time next time you put it back into Lightroom with the adjustments in it. So that's really cool, because if you decide that you want to, you've converted it to black and white and you look at it in 6 months' time and you realise that you shouldn't have done that, the original colour information from your RAW file is still there. If you get a JPEG and just shoot it in black and white, because you set it to that in the camera, or you change it later on the computer and just save it as a black and white file, that information's gone. that's gone. You're not getting back that information again. You're going to go and reshoot it. Most of the time you can't reshoot things because it's a moment in time, it's disappeared and you can't get it back again. So if you want that assurance, that reassurance in the future that if you put a weird crop on something, or that funny filter that you bought from VSCO or whoever it was, just, kind of looks a little dated now, or whatever it happens to be, you can then take it off again later, still have the original image as it was, pristine and untouched. Number 7, better white balance adjustment. So this is a bit of a contentious one because yes, you can do white balance adjustment on a JPEG. Of course you can do white balance adjustment on a JPEG. This video, for example, which is shot in a kind of like it's an MPEG rather than JPEG format, but it's the equivalent, it's not a RAW format. And because of the slight color cast of these lights, it looks a little magenta until I play around with it it comes out green, sorry, not magenta. But anyway, it comes out a weird color cast, the white balance is off, and I can adjust it. But it's only off by a small amount. As soon as I start to push it too far, and it's the same whether it's MPEG or JPEG, it's a compressed format, what happens is that you lose the information, or you can't get back the information because it's already been lost because it's been thrown away by the camera. So exactly the same thing as when we were talking about dynamic range. You start moving things around, it's just not there anymore. It's exactly the same with white balance. You can push it a little bit, but if it's a long way out, or if you want to move it a long way for creative purposes, you will struggle because the information isn't there in the file in the first place. Number 8. You can easily correct exposure. And again, this is something where there will be no doubt an inordinate number of people making comments below going, well, of course, I'm a professional photographer, or a proper photographer at any rate, and I never screw up my exposures. I always get them absolutely dead on all the time. And I've got an eye which is basically like a Sekonic light meter, and I can look at a thing and tell exactly that it should be f2.8 at 100th of a second at ISO 100, because I'm like that and I'm clever and I never make a mistake with my settings and leave it on the settings from the night before when I was shooting night photography and long star trails, and then in the morning I wanted to go out in the bright sunny day and shoot a football game. Okay, so most people actually, if they're really honest, they have done that at some point in their lives. The point is, it's an easy thing to do. Like, you're going outside, you're shooting in broad daylight, you go inside, you make a shot and it's dark because you've forgotten to change the settings on your camera. Or even if you're shooting in one of the sort of automatic or semi-automatic systems, the meter can just get thrown out by something like a bit of dark clothing or a bit of really white clothing, or, like weddings are a classic one for that. You meter off the bride's dress and then everything kind of gets, darker because it sees all the white and thinks that it's overexposed, and then her face goes into shadow. It happens, right? So, and in the heat of the moment, we don't always sort of get the settings straight on. With a RAW file, all that information, all that dynamic range is still in the photo. Remember how we were talking about, rather than just having 256 gradients, you've got 4,000 or 16,000 shades between black and white. They're all there, so you can go in and you can brighten them up or darken them down depending on which way you've screwed the shot up and get all the information back. Number 9, so this is about getting the right output for your specific purpose, and it's the color space output particularly that we're talking about. So there are 3 basically, and depending on what you want to do with it, one will be more appropriate than the other. If you're sending things out to print, most of the time you'll be using CMYK. If you want to retain the full color information that's in your image, you'll be using Adobe RGB. And if you're saving the file for web, then you're using sRGB, which is a compressed version of Adobe, and it's something which most web browsers are compatible with. So if you want to make sure that your colors look accurate on the screen that you're looking at to when they're finally ever going to be in the place that they're being designed to be in, that's a good sentence, wasn't it? But yeah, like the final sort of place in the world, then you need to know that they're going to look how you hope they're going to look and not look all weird and funny and smushy. And the way to do that is making sure that you've got the right output color space. Because you've got all the information in the original RAW file, you can select the color space after the event. If you're shooting in JPEG, you can't. It's locked in. You've only got the few that you get from the JPEG file. Everything else is thrown away. You can never see it again. So number 10, and again, this links back to the original point that I was making about number 9 and about the output and having the different color spaces. And this is the point. This sounds okay, right? Like if you've got 16 million colors in JPEG, 16 million. Sounds all right, doesn't it? Except on a 12-bit RAW file, and bearing in mind that I had a 12-bit RAW file on my D300, Nikon D300, which came out in 2008, something like that. So it's, it was an old camera, or old by today's standards, that had 68 billion colors in it. Not 16 million, 68 billion. and that was in a camera that came out in 2008. The camera that I'm shooting on now, this camera here is the Fuji X-T1. That uses a 14-bit depth for its colour, and that means I'm getting 4.3, wait for it, trillion colours. 4.3 trillion colours in a 14-bit RAW file compared to 68 billion in a 12-bit RAW file and 16 million in a JPEG. So that's it, that's my 10 reasons why you should be shooting in RAW and not JPEG. If you've got other reasons why you should be shooting in RAW and not JPEG, please leave them in the comments below. If you've got reasons why you should be shooting JPEG and not RAW, leave those in the comments below as well, and you never know, I might make a video about that at some point. And as always, if you're watching on YouTube, please subscribe on that big red button that appears underneath the video. Thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you again soon. Cheers.